Chapter 14 is all about epidemiology, which I think most students find pretty interesting. So I think when we go through this chapter, a lot of the information will seem very relevant because of what we're experiencing right now with the outbreak situation. In this first slide, it's a question, but since I can't really ask you that question, I want you just to ponder this for a second. What do you think the ways that humans acquire their normal flora, right? All the bacteria that live on and in us. How do we get them? Our first meals, our first breaths, during the birthing process, or in the womb? Well, A through C are ways we do acquire our first dose of microbiota, but the womb, right, and the uterus should be sterile during pregnancy, so there is no microorganisms there. In this figure over here, we see all of the things that we'll be talking about during this chapter that involves the chain of infection. Of course, we need the infectious agent, right? But we also have to have a reservoir. Where does that organism normally exist? The portal of exit, how they're exiting the host, the mode of transmission to get, and the portal of entry to get into the new host, right? So all of these things are important. In this table of the symbiotic relationships, and if you remember, symbiosis means organisms living together, it's a quick review of all of the different ways microorganisms can exist with us, and these relationships are true of any type of symbiosis. But they could be mutualism, right? Mutualistic relationship where both organisms are benefiting. And for example, the bacteria in our colon are said to be mutualistic. Commensals mean that one organism is benefiting, but the other is really not harmed or helped in any way. And an example they give is mites in our hair follicles. Well, the mites are benefiting from the environment of our hair follicles, but they really aren't doing anything for us or against us by being there. Mensalism is a term that really I hadn't seen used much until this version of the textbook came out, but I guess they're beginning to use this term. And that is the first organism is harmed, I guess sort of on accident, because the other organism really isn't benefiting or is harmed by the relationship, but they're accidentally sort of harming the other. And I don't really agree with this example where a fungus secreting an antibiotic, which is inhibiting nearby bacteria, because the fungus is definitely benefiting by, suppressing the competition for the nutrients. So I'm not sure I really believe this particular example there. Parasitism is benefiting one organism but harming the other, and these are the disease-causing organisms. So in this chapter we're really sort of focusing a lot on parasitism and a little bit on mutualism, although we will use the term commensalism to some degree. So when we think about our microbiome, these are the organisms that are on our surfaces, but they don't cause disease, right? But they also are going to live in our gut and all of those surfaces that have contact with the outside environment. And I like to try to draw this very simple, I'll call it like a gingerbread man, to give us an example where the surface of the person is completely colonized. But if you think about it, if you think about their mouth and then their intestines all the way exiting through the anus, all of those surfaces are also colonized because they have contact with the outside environment, and we are hosting the organisms in there. But all the other tissues and whatnot should be sterile. So if you think about our hearts, our deep lungs, all of those things, they're sterile, okay? The resident microbiota are mostly commensals, or they're mutualistic, right? We're both benefiting. And the transient microbiota, when we did that hand wash experiment, we talked about those. They don't really persist, right? They don't live with us for very long. They disappear. Okay, so opportunistic pathogens are important, and we will be talking about some of them through the different chapters, especially towards the end of the book, because these are taking advantage of an opportunity to cause an infection. So usually, normally, they're not causing a problem, but they will if given the right situation. And one of those situations might be our immune system is somehow suppressed. So if you think about HIV and screwing up your ability to stimulate your immune system, right, then organisms will cause disease that wouldn't normally do it, or changes in the normal microbiota. If you think about when people get, sometimes women can get yeast infections, that's often because they've taken antimicrobials for something else, and they wipe out their normal microbiota in the vagina, and then that screws up the balance and you end up with a yeast infection. So those types of changes in the microbiota can cause a problem. Or if you introduce them into an unusual site. So think about skin organisms getting into like a surgical wound or something like that. Okay, so those are the abilities of your normal microbiota to cause opportunistic infections or unusual infection. Thrush is a yeast infection that is occurring in the oral cavity, and this is because usually there's a local immune suppression or some sort of imbalance with your normal microflora. I'm going to talk a little bit about reservoirs of disease. So reservoirs are where your pathogens are the organisms that cause disease, right? Those are where organisms kind of hang out and are the source for an infection in a host of some sort. So if you look over here, the infection elements little diagram, you have to have that source of organism. So we're talking about reservoirs here. And then, of course, you have to have a host for that disease that you're talking about and some mode of transmission from the reservoir. So we can have three types of reservoirs. An animal reservoir is where you would find the infection that could then maybe jump to humans when we talk about a zoonosis, right? And they think that that's probably what happened with this COVID-19. Looking at the sequence, it looks like it at some point existed in a bat. Now, whether there was another animal that came between the bat and the human is still up to some debate, but it does look like it came from an animal reservoir. Human carriers are also possible, and even in this disease, they talk about people that are transiently infected and asymptomatic. That's a carrier state. Okay, so we know that there are sometimes people that can even long-term be shedding organism and causing problems, or we can have a non-living reservoir like water or something like that, soil. So as with that definition that word I was mentioning a moment ago, zoonoses. So if you think about animals in a zoo, right? Zoonoses are diseases that are naturally spread from an animal host to a human. And in our little clip when we were watching about HIV is another one that looks like at one point it was in probably chimpanzees and then jumped to humans. So that was a zoonosis. Okay, so zoonoses can be acquired by either direct contact. So, think about something like rabies, where an animal might bite you or their saliva comes in contact with, an open wound or something like that. You might get it by eating the animal, or you can have blood-sucking arthropods like a tick, for example, that feeds on an infected animal and then feeds on a person. Okay. Oftentimes, humans are a dead end host, meaning that the disease could infect you, but then you don't transmit it beyond that. That's not what's happening with COVID-19, right? It looks like it jumped from an animal to humans and then is spreading quite well amongst humans. So this is a usually, not an always. A little bit more about human carriers. I'll probably end this this introduction to epidemiology here. So I want to direct your attention to this story about Typhoid Mary. Excuse me. So I was mentioning a minute ago, asymptomatic but infective people are called human carriers, right? So they can pass the infections to others even though they're not sick. And Typhoid Mary is the classic example of a carrier. Her story is actually quite sad. She was working in the days before antibiotics, and they really didn't have a large understanding about disease transmission, but epidemiologists had figured out that diseases could be transmitted by people, and they knew about the carrier state. So typhoid is a infection that can kill people, and unfortunately, Typhoid Mary worked as a cook. This disease is caused by a salmonella that is transmitted via the fecal oral route. Obviously, she was not the most hygienic of people because she infected the families that she was working with. They would fall ill, some of them would die. She would be out of work because the family was sick. She'd move on, get hired by another family, and get them sick, and so on. But she never drew you know, the she never came to the conclusion that she was the one infecting. Although the epidemiologist tracked her down and told her to stop working as a cook, she did start working as a laundress for a short period of time, but that didn't really pay as well. So she went back to being a cook, and sure enough, more people were getting infected. They ended up having to arrest her and keep her in a basically under lockdown in a home where she ended up dying eventually because she couldn't be trusted not to work and infect people, and she died saying that she was not the cause of the infection. So her story is quite a sad one. And why carrier states exist for some individuals is not really clear, but it definitely exists. So humans are a carrier. The other type of reservoir I was mentioning was non-living reservoirs like soil and food. We can have organisms that exist there and then get picked up and transmit the infection. So oftentimes we have transmission being mediated by fecal material or urine of infected individuals. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of the routes in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to stop this little bit, and we'll pick up with exposure to microbes and contamination versus infection in the next little clip.